While I still consider myself primarily a sim racer first and an amateur racer second, I've noticed over the past 5 to 6 years of racing at an amateur and regional level that real racers who haven't already gotten into sim racing still, for the most part, don't like and don't care for sim racing, or in particular, sim racers. The people who should be going full send into our hobby during the winter months as a means to fill the void in between racing seasons instead don't really want anything to do with it. And the reason for this is pretty simple. Because these games are heavily reliant upon social elements, the old school blue collar types that make up a majority of real life racing communities find it very difficult to get along with upper class nerds. These nerds attempt to enforce a pretty strict set of social standards on the community, one which doesn't mirror a real world racetrack at all, and then talk down to the same professional and amateur drivers they strive to idolize. For any sort of outsider that runs an amateur or semi-professional level car on the weekends and thinks sim racing might be cool to get into one day, it instead comes across as an uncool and unfun chess club, but with race car games. And I believe there are three main elements fueling this, and let's just get right to it. The first and most prominent issue is sim racing's recent infestation with theater kids and the baggage that comes with theater kids. Someone was running a Donald Trump car in a street stock race, so some guy on Twitter took it upon himself to intentionally wreck the guy, take video of it, and then post it on Twitter for clout. These are the kind of emotional children you're dealing with on iRacing. The guy got offended by somebody's paint job, intentionally wrecked them, which is against the rules of the game, you can get banned for doing that, and then posted the whole incident on Twitter for an ego boost. By comparison, here's Jimmy Bluett's race shop. This guy was on the Dale Jr. download a few weeks ago. He's one of the most successful NASCAR modified drivers in the Northeast. Look in the background. No, this is not Photoshop. Blewett really has a flag of Donald Trump superimposed onto John Rambo in his race shop. Do you think this guy wants to play iRacing against children who will wreck him for who he voted for when he can just go race for real? I don't think so. And do you think that when Buddy goes to race at like Stafford or Wall Stadium, people send him into the outside wall because of who he voted for? No. This kind of shit is going to scare people off from getting into sim racing. Moving on to a different game, a different platform, but the same overall point. Forza Motorsport, in the midst of dealing with leaderboard cheaters and a bunch of issues with Forza Horizon 4 at the time, decided the most pressing issue instead was to ban the creation of the Rebel flag inside their livery creation tool. This meant it was now against the game's terms of service to create the General Lee. And as you can imagine, the trading paints app for iRacing eventually followed suit. At the local and regional level, this kind of ass pain doesn't exist. I've mentioned this in my last video, my 2022 season recap. I've personally raced at a track that is sponsored by a heavy equipment provider that uses the Rebel flag as their logo. Nobody cared. Nobody even said a word. This is an issue that existed entirely on social media and was not present in real life. The hobby stock I'm showing on the screen right now, my African American friend actually drove in an invitational race, and he thought it was hilarious. I've seen the Rebel flag on monster trucks up here, as well as a pretty decent array of professional category cars. I'll put them on the screen right now. The point I'm trying to make is that for a real racer to go from this environment where everything's just done in good fun and nobody really cares about this shit, to an online environment where people almost compete to see who can be the most offended by it, would be extreme culture shock. This extends to more than just the Confederate flag. My city's football team, similar to the Washington Redskins, was renamed from the Eskimos to the Elks because of alleged racist connotations. Yet at my local dirt track, there's a sign for Eskimo auto and truck parts that nobody has complained about because it's not an issue. Go upload a Washington Redskins Cup car on Trading Paints right now and tell me how that goes. I assure you that you're not going to get very far. Racers, again, going from an environment where this stuff literally doesn't matter and everyone just walks by it, to an online environment where people hyper-fixate on this stuff, would be extreme culture shock and put them off completely. But the most off-putting of them all is iRacing's own code of conduct, which effectively bans foul language from the game. A lot of people don't know this because they've never read the sporting code, but iRacing has zero tolerance for any kind of foul language. If someone moves you up the track and you call them an asshole, they can protest you for that. This has made sim racers extremely soft and petty and unable to handle basic banter. By comparison, go to your local track, whether it be Brands Hatch for British GT or just some sort of quarter-mile bull ring, and just walk through the pits. You will hear people dropping F-bombs because they banged their knuckle on their car. In between heats or after the main, you will hear people calling each other assholes. Take a pair of binoculars and look inside the cockpits of some of the cars after an incident or pieces of contact. You will see people giving each other the finger. Nobody cares. It's how we communicate. This is not acceptable at all in sim racing. You basically have to act like it's a Christian server all the time. Real racers are loud, abrasive, adrenaline junkies, yet if they want to get into sim racing, they have to somehow get all that out of their system and act like it's a high school chess club. And it's because sim racers, by and large, hyperfixate on complete nonsense such as who a person voted for, or what design is on their car, or what kind of language they use in the game chat. To real racers, they come across as effeminate, petty nerds who hate fun. Now, I said there were 3 points to this whole argument. Let's get on point number 2. Sim racers are dismissive of pro racers. Yes, this is a thing. Someone on 4chan made this argument a couple years ago, and I'm stealing it because it's actually really good. You'll notice in sim racing circles that a lot of guys like to label certain drivers who just didn't perform at the top level as busts. Darian, I'm not calling out you specifically by using the screenshot of your videos, but I'm just kind of making a point here. Sim racers tend to forget that guys like Andy Houston and Scott Speed, Scott Wimmer, and Casey Atwood were still some of the best drivers in North America. Their cup careers just didn't pan out for one reason or another. Career modes found in racing sims and other video games, however, have taught a generation of these kids that, hey, if you don't climb the ladder and spend 10 years in the NASCAR Cup Series or 10 years driving for a top-level F1 team, that you're somehow a failure, when it's just not true. I would hate to be one of these drivers playing something like iRacing or another racing sim in their leisure time, only to get shit-talked by kids saying that I was trash and never amounted to anything, when at one point I was one of the best drivers in North America. I just got signed to Bill Davis Racing when they were dying, and my career kind of fizzled out after that. This is just one way that sim racers can be condescending towards pro drivers, but there's another more egregious way that's just really pathetic and sad. Some of you guys might remember James Baldwin. He won McLaren's World's Fastest Gamer contest and then landed a seat in Jenson Button's GT3 team, in which he competed in the British GT season in, I believe, 2020. The guy did really well and even won a few races, but his overlords made no effort to help him learn the business side of things, so once the season ended, he was just out of a ride. And when he finally got back in the car for the 2022 24 Hours of Spa, he was pretty rusty and didn't run very well. Upon uploading his weekend vlog, a sim racer who has never raced GT3 cars before arrives in the comments to tell a professional GT3 driver that the simulator he's using to practice is wrong, and that's why he was off pace by 2 seconds per lap. James, to his credit, blows the guy out of the water saying, I was slow because I haven't been in the car for 2 years, which is just one of the most based mic drops I've ever seen in sim racing. But this just goes to show the kind of weird interactions that pro drivers are having with computer nerds. The computer nerds are telling them that they don't understand their own race car. There are all sorts of exchanges happening like this in the sim racing scene, and I'm sure people in the comments will leave their favorites. This used to happen a lot on the iRacing forums, and there are times where it genuinely did put off pro drivers from participating in the game for extended periods of time. There's a story from years ago now where V8 Supercar phenom Shane Van Gisbergen helped iRacing with their V8 Supercar model and basically got it 99% accurate, only for iRacing to break it in a build a few months later, which just pissed Shane off and he didn't come back for a while. Someone might have to clarify the details on that for me, but that's the story that I remember. Now, the inverse side to this is point number 3. Just as sim racers are dismissive of pro racers, they're also dismissive towards amateur racers. Career modes and progression mechanics across multiple generations of racing games and racing simulators have taught race fans that you race in rookie street stocks to get out of rookie street stocks, and some cars solely exist to just be driven for a few races, only for you to graduate to the next car after you've won an event or two. This is not how real racing works at all. There are guys who spend their entire able-bodied careers racing in Spec Miata. There are guys who spend their entire able-bodied career racing rookie street stocks and just touring around to all the big money races. There's a touring national championship for sport compact cars, which I race, a car so slow it's not even featured in iRacing. Yet you'll notice when you mention to other sim racers that, like, hey, there are affordable forms of racing you can actually get into and you can race for a long time and it's a lot of fun and you can potentially make money, they will ignore you because it's not GT3 and proceed to spend the exact same amount on their sim rig, which is just hilarious. Video games have taught them to look down upon cars that they could otherwise be racing and have a lot of fun with. The reality is that it's $27,000 to make a start in the NASCAR Pinty Series. A start. Most of us don't have that kind of money. And for those of us that do, we know there are more cost-effective things to spend your money on than blowing 27 grand to run 14th in a NASCAR Pinty Series race. Sim racers holding out for that kind of opportunity, which has happened to one guy once for winning one contest, and then blowing the disposable income they do have on video game toys when they could have actually went racing for real and, had a lot of fun with it, but they won't because they think certain amateur cars are beneath them, is just kind of sad. Now, on its own, this would be just a weird quirk of a nerdy community, but sometimes they will go further and try and twist the knife by saying, hey, your race car is actually not a real race car and your racing experience isn't real racing. Now you've lost the amateur racers as well. Maintaining something like a street stock or a sport compact or a Legends car or even some sort of amateur bike is still a lot of work and time. And the racing is still very much real racing. It's just affordable enough where if you put a baby in someone during the off season, it's not going to financially ruin you. Sim racers choosing to die on this hill and shit talk amateur racers the same way they shit talk pro racers for supposedly being busts is a quick way to scare off anyone even remotely interested in these games who races in real life. And these three core elements are the reasons why real racers still aren't fond of sim racers and still kind of look down upon them. They see sim racers as petty, effeminate internet nerds who think they know more than real drivers do. There's nothing we can really do to change this mentality, but all I can really do is point out that this is the core problem you guys have to overcome.